Welcome everyone and good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. This is a follow-up event to an event we ran in June, a collaborative event between the Royal College of GP's Vale of Trent faculty, the Nottinghamshire Phoenix Progamme and GP Task Force Derbyshire. I'm Dr. Zarina Beg. I'm the Vale of Trent faculty educational lead, and I've been working together with Dr. Gemma Wilkinson from the Phoenix Progamme and Dr. Gail Waldron from the GP Task Force Derbyshire to bring this follow-up collaborative event. A special thanks to Gail and Gemma for working together with this, and also thanks to James Waldron, who's been helping with the Zoom IT side in the background. And the link on there is the link to our first event that was in June, and that was our sort of pilot event aimed at ST3s, but also useful for new to practice GPs as well, based on your CV and your career, how to pick a job. Okay. Next slide. This up here. So we based today's event on the feedback from that first event, and we're looking at models of working today, and aimed mainly at ST3s, but also the first 1 to 2 years, even up to the first 5 GPs. We often think of those main 4 in the middle, so partnership, salaried, locum, and portfolio work. And I just wanted to put this up there to demonstrate the huge variety that you can have in your career as a GP. You can really follow your passion. You can combine several of those types of work together. So it was just to demonstrate the huge diversity that there is and the options that you have in your career as a GP. So let's go on to our introductions. So first up, we've got Dr. Julia White, who's a partner GP at the Fairfields practice in Hyson Green. She joined there in 2015 and has been working there doing 5 sessions a week. She has an interest in health inequality and physical activity promotion. And I know this because I worked in her room and she has a standing desk. So bonus points for that, Julia. Our next GP to speak will be Dr. Eilise Brogan. She grew up in Derbyshire, qualified at Newcastle Medical School, and came back to Derbyshire to complete her GP training last year. She's now part-time GP at the Critch Medical Practice. She's doing a fellowship with the Derby GP Task Force, and she has 3 lovely children who we'll be hearing about later. And with her husband Tim, she runs to keep herself sane and balance her love of baking, which I think you're not alone in doing that, Eilise. Our Locum GP speaker today is Dr. Gabrielle Nyland. She splits her time between 3 roles: locum GP work, salaried work, and she works 1 day a week on the inpatient ward at Ashgate Hospice in Chesterfield. She stayed very much a local girl, having trained on the Chesterfield GP training scheme, qualifying 2 years ago, and works locally in Derbyshire since. And last but by no means least, we have Dr. James Waldron, who's going to be our portfolio speaker. He's a former Health Education England GP fellow and splits his time between clinical general practice, education and service development. He's the RCGP co-lead and the CCG lead for the first 5s in Nottinghamshire. And he also works with the Training Hub and Phoenix Progamme. And for those of you who are local, so based in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, Chesterfield, and you haven't heard of the Phoenix Progamme or GP Derbyshire Task Force, do check them out. They're brilliant in terms of resources, support. They cover so many different things, and they're there for trainees and new to practice GPs. All right, so without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Julia White.
Okay, so can everybody hear me? And am I sharing okay? Yeah, okay, so looking at the survey at the start, I think I've got the hardest sell here. So I thought I'd start by just telling you how I got into partnership, because it was pretty much my first job out of qualifying as a GP. So I'm a Bolton girl. I went to the University of Manchester, did my foundation years at Wigan, did that usual thing of not knowing what I wanted to do as a career. So I ended up in Australia, just working in A&E department, and then came back to do my GP training in Preston. At that time, I needed to move to Nottingham because I can do my job anywhere and my husband could only work in Nottingham. So I had to decide on a new job in an area that I didn't know anything about, and I didn't know whether I wanted to look for a partnership, a salaried, locum. So what my trainer's advice was to just look at your own priorities and then take it from there, because I think a lot of jobs can fit into any of the categories as long as it fits your priorities with it. So basically having a look at the practice itself. So location. Do you want to work in inner city? Do you want to work in the countryside? Do you want to work close to where you live? Do you want to be far enough away so you don't bump into any of your patients, which I highly recommend? Yeah, the population of the practice. So I think, yeah, population of the practice, the size of the practice, how many patients, is the practice joint with any other practices, is it dual site, the premises, so important to know, is the practice rented, or is it part of the partnership? So I think I go on to, right, so this is more on the practices, yeah. So location, population size, additional services. So is there anything that you're interested in and want to get involved in when you are working? So fitting coils, minor surgery, anything that you've got an interest in, does the practice actually do those things? And then something I didn't think about when I was looking for a job was whether it was a training practice or not. I think as I've done the job, that we are a training practice, and I think that is a massive bonus in the job because I actually really love that part of it. So I would recommend to actually think about that before you look at your job. Okay, so second priority, the team. Hugely important. I think the jobs that we do, it can be really stressful, and I think one of the hardest things about it is risk management, risk management of your patients, time management, and I think having a good team makes the difference between whether or not you love the job or whether you absolutely hate it. So have a look at the members of the team. Is it a big team? Is that do you want to work in a big team? Do you prefer a smaller team where you get to know everybody, so you work closer together? Who's part of the wider team? So is it just partners, GP partners? Are there salaried doctors as well? Do they use locums? How many nurses are there? Practice manager, hugely important. Has the practice manager been there a long time? And that leads us on to the turnover of the staff. Have the partners been there for a long time? Do the receptionists, are they leaving after a year? That might tell you something about the practice. So having a look at sort of all the staff members. So the partnership that I'm in, so we are seven partners, and we all work equally. So we work the same number of sessions. The pay is split 7 ways. The job roles are all split 7 ways. Down to like CQC work, down to QOF work, everything is split between us. And that might not be the case at every practice, and that might suit you, but that you also might feel that's quite daunting when you first go into a job role. So definitely something to think about. And again, the distribution of the job roles. A lot of the time when you go into a partnership, you will have a 6-month period where you might just be doing the day-to-day job rather than taking on the extra job roles, or it's built up slowly. So that's definitely something to sort of negotiate. If you look at it and think that's too much for me to do right from the start, then that's definitely a place where you can look at the contract, negotiate, maybe say, I won't do any of the extra job roles until I'm used to doing the day-to-day work, because it can seem like a lot to take on at the start. But I think you know, I do 5 sessions, and it's sort of 3.5 that are clinical, and then you get that extra 1.5 to do all of your admin things. I tend to run over and sort of use sort of 6 sessions to do it all, but yeah, it's definitely something that isn't everything all at once at the start. Okay, so I chose to do 5 sessions because I don't want to spend all of my life in work. In partnership, the job is not done until the job is done, and at the end of the day, it's down to the partners to make sure everything is done. I found that working the 5 sessions sort of leads me to 3 days, and then I've got 2 days a week to do whatever I want to do. I deliberately looked for I deliberately chose to work as a partner over 5 sessions above another job that I applied for, which was a salaried job, which was 8 sessions. I felt that I could manage my time better being a partner. Have a look at how the sessions are across the week as well if you're having less sessions. I've got friends who work as a partner, and they are the on-call doctor every Friday. I'm not sure I would want to do that. We very much share our on-calls. We distribute them differently through the week. As 7 doctors, we are 4 of us who work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and 3 that work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So you sort of have your long weekend period, which works well for us. So have a look at how the flexibility is, how the distributions are across the week, and where they would be expecting you to fit in. Flexibility. I think this is one of the massive plus points for being a partner. Like this afternoon, I should be having a clinical session, but I just told my partners that I'm not because I'm doing this. So I just haven't. So lots more flexibility. If anyone's got any hospital appointments or anything they need to go to, we negotiate with ourselves, and we just are super flexible with when we start, when we finish our sessions, what days we do them on. So I think that's a massive plus point for being a partner. You basically get to say what you do. Yeah, coffee break, discussion time. I think this goes along any job, especially salaried or partnership. You know, is there a programmed coffee break, which during lockdown and COVID time we're not quite getting at the moment, and that makes a big difference to your day to day. Again, the extra job roles, can these be done from home? Do you have to be in the surgery for them? Could it be something that you enjoy doing? Definitely not QOF and definitely not CQC. They just have to be done. So on calls, home visits, have a look at how they're distributed, especially home visits. Are they done fairly? You might find at some practices that have both partnership and salaried doctors that actually partners don't tend to do that many home visits. They get distributed to other staff members. So that might be a plus point. Holidays. Have a look at, I mean, we're very flexible with our holidays. We even shift our sessions during the week, so we might do a full week and have an extra week off, so we gain bonus holiday weeks. So again, flexibility tends to be better with the holidays, but I do also have colleagues who are in partnerships where there's a definite hierarchy and they don't get the holidays that they choose. So that can be a plus and might not be. Again, for work-life balance, you think about your commute. This is something that was quite high up on my things. I like to run to work. I like to cycle to work. So it needs to be far enough away that that's a decent distance, but not too far away. But again, that would go for any job that you do. And I think this is where extra stuff comes in with partnership. I would say don't be scared of a partnership. Have a look at the contract. I was quite reassured when I looked at my contract that it was only a 4-month notice period at the end. There was no buying into any of the building. So at the end of the day, if it didn't suit me, I was able to leave quite easily. Again, sort of it's the usual things that you're looking at in any contract. I would get somebody to go over it with you. I was quite lucky with my my trainer that I had in Preston. He actually went through my contract with me. He let me have a look at their contract to have a look at any differences. Also just contacted my friends that were in the same boat in Preston and sort of talked through those. There'll be things on there that are more important to you than other people, so have a look at that. Look closely at what happens if another partner leaves or if there is a dispute in the practice. Those bits won't be on contracts if you're salaried or locum in. And yeah, I would just, yeah, and it might even be worth getting people who are not medics to have a look at the contract. So my husband was able to pick up things on there that I hadn't thought of, which you know, might be a good idea as well. So I'm 5 years into the partnership now. I would definitely do it again. I'm very pleased with the choice that I had. I spent a lot of time getting to know the doctors who I was working with. I felt very, very comfortable joining the practice, and I've been able to do lots of things within the practice, which so I mean, before COVID-19, I was running Catch to 5K groups with my patients, joining in with a cycling club that's around the corner with the patients. We even got some chair-based yoga going. So lots of things that I'm interested in. I was able to just, I mean, there was no sort of debate over whether you could do these things. It was, this is what I want to do, and I'm just going to give it a go. And very supportive colleagues, and that's something, a definite bonus to the job. Yeah, so all in all, I think my advice would be to look at the job itself, look at the practice itself, look at the team itself. Don't be put off if they're offering a partnership, because it's not the tie-in that you might think it is, and there's a lot of flexibility there. So yeah, that would be my input for you.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Julia. And there's some really lovely comments coming up in the chat box as well. So if you have any questions about partnership, Julia's staying on with us for the Q&A session at the end. So please pop your questions in the chat box and we'll try and put them to Julia. I think it's so nice to hear that you're still pleased with your choice 5 years later.
Yeah.
I think that's really positive. And you've given us some great tips, such as using non-medical eyes to have a look at the contract. I think that's a really good tip.
Yeah.
And seeking advice from your trainer and your friends in similar situations for advice, because nobody goes into any job sort of completely alone. We all have to ask questions and get advice from others. So thanks so much, Julia.
Okay.
I'll now hand over to our next speaker, which is Dr. Eilise Brogan, who is a salaried GP, and she's going to tell us about life as a salaried GP. Over to you, Eilise.
Hello, hi everyone. I'm Eilise Brogan. Thank you for that introduction, Zarina. And that was really nice to hear from you, Julia, as well. I'm talking to you because I'm a salaried GP. I've only been qualified for the last year, but it's been a good year, so I just wanted to tell you a bit about that. As well as being a salaried GP, I work at a practice called Crouch in Derbyshire. I've also been doing a fellowship with the GP task force with Dr. Susie Bailey, which has been great, and Dr. Gail Waldron. And I've also become part of First Five. So I just wanted to mention a couple of other things as well as my salaried role. The reason that I wanted to be salaried was because I've got 3 young children, and I'll show you a picture of them in sombreros in a moment, and I felt that I wanted to have more time at home with them and kind of split my time with working. Thank you, James. If you don't mind just going on to the next slide. Thank you. That's them. They're 6, 4 and 2. So while they're little, I just made the decision that I wanted to work a bit less. But the other thing that I know, and I found that through training, is I love stability. I love knowing when I'm going to work, who I'm working with, and what my day is going to be like and my week. I like making connections, working in the same team. And so for me, I felt salaried would be the right thing. And I found that it has been over the last year. Can we go to the next slide? Thanks, James. Thank you for sorting that. So my youngest always likes to wear a fairy dress when we go on a walk and carry a naked baby. So that's what we're doing there. I've sorted my week, and my practice has accommodated me to allow me to work Mondays and Tuesdays, and then I do my fellowship on a Wednesday morning. So for me, Wednesday is the end of the week, which is fantastic. Also, and I am going to mention it in a little bit, I'm on the retention scheme. So I have a GP assigned as my kind of mentor in the practice. I do think you could still have that even if you weren't on the retention scheme. I think it's nice to know you've got someone who you can go specifically to ask questions and just get a bit of help if you need it. I can do some work from home with my fellowship, which has obviously been great given the current situation. And because of the way I've worked my week, I do feel like I've got a nice separation between work and home and children. Can I have the next slide? Thanks, James. So, and my responsibilities, in terms of being a salaried, you do have less control than a partner. The flip side of that is you do have less responsibilities. So I obviously don't get any share of the profits, but I don't manage staff, buildings or finances. And again, just for me at this time in my life, that works for me. I am interested in possibly becoming a partner in the future, but it's just not what I wanted to do at the moment. One of the other things we were asked to talk about was how we went about finding the role and applying, negotiating. So I found the role on the internet, actually. I hadn't heard anyone mention it and just applied. Often word of mouth is good, contacting the LMC, emails, they're all ways that you can find out about jobs. Obviously, we're in a really difficult situation at the moment, and there just aren't quite as many jobs as there usually would be, but I do think that that will change hopefully over the next few months and the next year or so. Negotiating, I do think it's important to just think about what makes you happy, what's going to make the job work for you, and what might be your non-negotiables. So I've got a bit more information about that in a few slides. So if you don't mind going to the next one. What I wanted to ask you all, and again, thank you for this, James, I would like to do a poll and just see what you would all guess would be the kind of average pay in our area for a salaried GP. So I'm talking per session. So if you wouldn't mind voting, and then we'll just see what we can come up with. Great, you're all voting very quickly, thank you. So that's great. So I'll just put that to the side. Okay, so if we have a look at that, so most people are saying they're between 9 and 10,000. Thank you. So yes, in our area, I think the lowest would be about 8.5, but it can go in inner city areas, can go up to 10 and possibly 11. It does depend on the practice size, on what your responsibilities are going to be. So although sometimes for people pay really is their non-negotiable, and you've got an amount that you need and you might have to look around for that. Sometimes if the pay is a bit less, but maybe you're not going to have to do that much on call, maybe you're not going to have any QOF responsibilities, maybe you're not going to do any of the extended hours. If your role is slightly easier and that's what you want, then maybe pay won't be quite as important to you. But yeah, I think people's guesses there are very good. So I'm going to stop sharing on those. So I'll cross that off. The other thing to just mention, there's a really good handbook on the BMA website. I don't know if anyone's seen it on a salaried GP role. Got a lovely checklist there to go through that you can have a little look about what you should be doing when you're thinking about working at a practice. You can also speak to people that you know who might have worked at that practice and might know a little bit more about it, so that can be very useful. The wins for the role, for me, working part-time as salaried, I have a short week, I have a good work-life balance, and the only flip side would be is you have less control of the practice. James, do you mind going to the next slide? Thank you. So, next steps. If you want to be a salaried GP, obviously the first thing to do is look for jobs, and we have said that this is a difficult period. Lovely to think about where you want to work. I work in the countryside, as I said, in a little village. It's got 2 branch surgeries, and that suits me. That's the kind of thing that I've enjoyed in my training, is working in rural practices. And just as Julia said, the team is so important to think about who you're going to be working with. I went to a practice that I'd never been to before, and it's hard to know if you're going to be able to work well with someone when you're just going for a meeting day at the practice. So I went for a practice visit. Everyone seemed really nice, and I spoke to some GP trainees who I knew had been there, and they gave me really favourable reports. So I think it's about talking to people if you've never worked there. The other thing that I learned recently is that if you make a friend at work, you've got a life expectancy that's 7 years longer. So it's very good for you to try and make some friends at work. Obviously have your CV ready. Yeah, as I've mentioned, do visit the practice. Does it matter to you if you're going to have to work at a branch surgery? I thought it might be a bit daunting just being on your own working somewhere, but actually when it's just for the afternoon, it's really nice. As I've mentioned, I am on the retention scheme, and I will just mention that in a bit. When you've got your contract, the BMA said they will turn around a contract check in 5 days, so that's really useful. They'll look at it for you. I think the LMC sometimes do contract checks. I remember someone saying that previously, but that is important to make sure that you feel like your contract is fair. And I think agreeing a job plan is really nice, to have it written down, what you'll be doing when, when would you be getting your letters done, your results, and talking to them about the other things that I've got down the side. My children chose the colours for those ticks. I think it's nice to just know roughly how many visits you might be expected to do. So in my practice, when I visited, they said, we only ever get 1 or 2, so per person. So that sounded totally reasonable. How many patients might you have to see a session? So in some places it can be 18 morning, 18 in the afternoon. At my practice, I'm really lucky, and it's 13. So again, that does make a difference. So do talk to them about that. How often would you be doing on call? So I do it 25% of my time. And Julie mentioned coffee breaks. They do definitely bring people together, and we used to have them, and they've we haven't been able to have them. So I am looking forward to getting back to those. Again, just as Julie said, annual leave. We have annual leave meetings once a year, and they include me in that, just as if I'm a partner. So my requests are put at the same level as theirs, which is really nice. Would you be able to go to their practice meetings, their education meetings? What days are they on? It's lovely to feel part of the team. The other thing, I've mentioned, how much time do all the letters and prescriptions take? It's quite nice to be able to speak to them about that and when that would be done. I think again, Julie mentioned about cover. How would that work? Will you have to cover someone regularly, and will that work for you? Talked about pay already, and the other thing is, yes, if you've got a specialist interest, would you be able to do that in the practice, or is someone already doing that, and would that be difficult? So just lots of things to think about. We're not in the perfect world where we can all just choose our perfect job, but even if you don't get your perfect job, it's nice to think about what you might have in the future. So the retention scheme is a good thing to consider if you are wondering about if you've got caring responsibilities, or what they do say is whether you're considering leaving general practice, but caring responsibilities would fit the criteria, and then you can apply to join the retention scheme. There's lots of information on the East Midlands Deanery, and I've put that website there at the bottom, so if you're interested, just jot that down. You can only do a maximum of 4 clinical regular GP sessions. You can do additional things like I'm doing the fellowship, but if you want to be on the retention scheme, you can only do those 4 sessions. And I've just put a few other bits on there about they do offer a bursary, an educational bursary for you, the GP, and they give financial support to the practice who take you on the retention scheme. So it does work out well for everyone. So James, could I have my next slide? Thank you. The other thing I just wanted to mention is to keep your eye out for other opportunities. So I'm really pleased that I was allowed to do a fellowship with the GP task force. I started it I'd nearly been qualified a year, so I felt like I was kind of getting into my role at the practice. So it was nice to take on a different challenge and just be thinking of different things. And the one I'm doing is looking at how to support GPs who've been off. So James, can I have my next slide? Thank you. The other thing that I've said yes to was leading their first 5 education group in Derby. That's with a friend, Henna. And that's been great, just to meet other GPs, to meet other doctors who come and do our education talks. Again, just if you keep your eyes peeled, often it's in emails, we get emailed about things, and I know often we're deleting them all, but it is nice to be doing other things, that's what I've found, not just to be doing a clinical GP, to just spread your wings a little bit. So that's something that I've got involved in and really enjoyed that. And can I have my brilliant. And just the final thing I wanted to mention is other opportunities that I've had which have been great through the GP task force was the partnership scheme. So I'm currently on that, and as I said, I am interested in partnerships. I'm learning more about that. I've had a mentor through GPS mentoring, which has been really useful, thinking about ways I can improve my working. I also, and I've seen some other people who did the GP Teaching Academy with me, and that's been really great. And Next Generation GP, I did that with James actually. That's been a really interesting course about different leaders over the UK. So there's loads out there that we can all do. It just broadens our horizons, I think, and it just adds something else to life. So, this is a stone, thank you NHS, that was outside, cracked, that somebody painted during the pandemic, which I thought was lovely. So it's just about looking out for things that bring some joy and saying yes to them. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Eilise. I love your little fact about if you make a friend at work, it extends your life by 7 years.
I know.
So I'm wondering if the more friends you have, the longer you'll live.
Live forever.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right, we'll move on to our next speaker. I know there's been some interest in the fellowship scheme, and we've got some people on our panel who are able to answer some questions about that during the Q&A. So we will expand on that. But thanks so much, Eilise. And I'll hand over to our next speaker, Dr. Gabrielle Nyland, who's going to be talking about life as a locum GP.
So my name is Gabrielle Nyland. So I am currently working as a locum GP alongside other roles. So I do a day's salaried general practice a week, and also work at Ashgate Hospice in Chesterfield 1 day a week as well. So I made the decision about a year ago to do some work as a locum GP, and that was following having spent a year working full-time as a salaried GP after finishing my GP training in Chesterfield. And I made the decision to change from the full-time salaried post because I wanted to take the opportunity to have a bit more flexibility and see what other practices were out there, and also different ways of working, and also allow myself the opportunity to have the time to try different things. And I enjoyed working as a salaried GP, but I've really enjoyed the last year and having the flexibility to make the change. So I think the beauty of working as a locum GP is it really does give you a lot of flexibility. Your work each week can be very different. You get the opportunity to work in different practices and in different places. So it is a brilliant opportunity and one that I would recommend. The other thing that I really enjoy about it is it gives you a lot of autonomy. So your week is really what you want it to be, and essentially you're self-employed. So it really, the onus is on you to sort your working week out and to take control of that. So I personally found that really a good opportunity, and I've learned a lot in the last week. Or in the last year, sorry. So next slide, please. So in terms of what the average day, the average week is like working as a locum, so as I've just said previously, every week is very different. So I currently actually work with Eilise, who you've just had speaking about being a salaried GP. So I'm currently working there 3 sessions a week as a maternity locum cover. So that's been nice in the sense that it's given me a bit more stability. And then around that, I've been able to locum in different places, sort of mainly around Chesterfield and within Derbyshire. And I've really enjoyed the opportunity to see how different practices and sort of how different places work, because no one GP surgery is the same. And this time last year, as working as a full-time salaried GP, I was thinking, where do I want to go next? And I was thinking about partnership, but I just wanted to take the opportunity to gain experience in different places. And I think that's actually something that will really help going forward if I do decide to go into a partnership. So every day is very different. How you set up the day will be very much what you negotiate with what the practice needs. So it's not so different to any other GP day, whether you're a salaried, whether you're a partner. You do set it up. There will be a certain amount of patients that you see, a certain amount of hours that you do, and you can sort of decide whether you do on calls, whether you do visits. And obviously there will be some sort of negotiation with what the practices need as well. So every week can be different. My weeks have been very different because depending on what other things I had outside of working as a locum, would obviously depend how many clinical sessions I did each week. So for example, in the last year, I've also done, as Eilise had mentioned, sort of the GP Teaching Academy, Next Generation GP. I've also sort of done an occupational medicine diploma, so as well as working in a hospice. And I've just really liked that being a locum GP has given me the flexibility to do all those different things and gain a lot of different experience. So yeah, every week is different. Next slide, please. So how to get work as a locum. So this is something at the moment that is actually quite interesting, particularly in the context of the pandemic. So some of you may have heard that actually locum work availability has, certainly at the start of the pandemic, there did seem to be a lot less work available. However, it does really seem that over the last, certainly the last couple of weeks, there do seem to be more requests coming in as practices get busier again, looking for locum GPs. And certainly pre-pandemic, there was, people were getting workers for locum, so that wasn't sort of an issue, but things did change as the pandemic sort of started. So certainly locally within Derbyshire, there is the chambers that are linked to the LMC, the Derbyshire sort of locum chambers, which I'm sure we can share a link for that page. So that's really good. So as a locum, you're obviously working independently. The chambers is where there's a group of locums working together or sort of under the chambers umbrella, which is very good if you still want to be part of a team, as it were. And there's also sort of lots of educational sort of sessions and things that are provided through that. You can get work through agencies. That's not something that I've done personally, but there are agencies out there that you can get locum work through. One of the best ways is to contact practices directly. If you speak to practice managers, get their emails. If you're wanting to work in a particular area, somewhere near where you live, you can contact places directly. What I would say is if you do that, send your CV across and sort of have a discussion with somebody there. That can be quite helpful. I think Susie's just shared the LMC website detail. The other thing is word of mouth as well. I found that when I changed from being a salaried GP full-time to going to do the locum work, actually speaking to other GPs and other practices that were friends from sort of my training scheme and things, I soon sort of, people were soon approaching sort of for work and things. So I think speaking to people is quite important. If you know other locums, speak to other locums. There is a lot of availability often out there just through speaking to people. Okay, next slide. So I think what you need to consider if you do want to be a locum. So what I found initially when I first started locum work, sort of my full, or sort of where I was going to get most of my work from, initially there was a lot of paperwork to sort out and a lot of things to sort out, but once you get yourself set up and into a routine and organised, generally it's actually fairly straightforward, but it's just the initial bit can seem like there's a lot to do. So there is a lot of paperwork to it. So it is different sort of the salaried and partnership sort of roles, in the sense that you are you do have to sort out things like your taxes, insurance, things like expenses, invoicing. You have to do all of that directly with the practices. So it is very, very important to keep up to date with all of that. You have to do your pension forms. So there's a couple of different pension forms that you have to do. There's a lot of information. I won't go into it in a lot of detail because I'm going to share a link later on that's got a really good PDF, which I found really useful when I first started off in terms of where to start with all these things. There are sort of a lot of very good online locum managers that are quite simple to use. Even things like the chambers, they've got sort of their own online system as well, where it keeps all of this information together and makes it quite easy for you to do things like pensions and your invoicing and tax and all those sort of things. So you've got all that information together. It's really, really important to keep good records of everything that you're doing. So things like your mileage, any extra expenses, all those sort of things, because then that obviously does come into place with things like taxes. I think the other thing that's really important, so working as a locum, you may often find that you're working in a practice that you haven't worked at before. You do find you end up going back to certain practices if you worked there before, which is always good because then you get to know how they work. It's just thinking about what you do on the day of your session when you first go into a new practice. Particularly, I always sort of go and introduce myself to the receptionist. If there's another doctor there, go and speak to them. A lot of places will have things like a locum pack now, where they give you a lot of information about things about how you request bloods, how you do referrals, where things are, thinking about where the emergency kit is, all those sort of things. So it's really just important to get yourself there a little bit early, I would say, and make sure you have sort of a clear idea of those sort of things. But again, I'll show you later on, there's quite a good PDF that I can just give you a link to that just tells you the sort of things to think about on the day of your session. But working as a locum GP, some people may think it's fairly lonely. Actually, if you do go and introduce yourself to different people within the practice, you generally find that actually it's quite an enjoyable role, and you do get to know different places as you go back, and I think it's actually quite good to do it. So okay, next slide. So we were asked to think about sort of the advantages and disadvantages of the role. So as I said previously, so the advantages are you get to go and work in lots of different places, see lots of different people, lots of different patients with a wide variety of conditions depending on where you work and which practices that you work in. It's very flexible, as I mentioned previously. I've done a lot of different things alongside working as a locum. And really enjoyed the independent working side of things, and the fact that I felt like I was in control of what each week looked like. It is really rewarding. Actually, often if practices need a locum, it may be that they're struggling, people have gone off sick, and actually they can be very, very grateful if you go into their practices. So it can be a really nice role actually to work in. The disadvantages, so as I mentioned previously, the demand for locum GPs can vary. There has been issues sort of within the pandemic, but again, that seems to be picking up again. So yes, your work's not guaranteed, but actually it does seem to be that work's picking back up again at the moment. And I think it's just make sure you keep speaking to different practices, and there's also different ways of trying to get the work. The independent working can be a disadvantage. It may be that you find that it is quite a lonely role at times, but I think that depends on sort of how you approach it. In terms of sort of independent working as well, from an educational point of view, you do have to sort of seek out sort of CPD and those sort of things, but actually locally within Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, there are a lot of sort of extra sort of educational sessions that are put on. So it's like Eilise mentioned previously in her presentation, the first 5 is an excellent sort of educational thing where you can have sort of regular teaching every couple of weeks, but there's a lot of things available for that. And then yes, the admin work, you do have to set aside time to do all of those things. I think a lot of it at the beginning there is a lot of paperwork when you get started, but actually as you get going, that all becomes a bit more straightforward as you get used to it. Next. And then, yeah, so we were asked, why do we like to work in the region? I grew up in Derbyshire, went to Nottingham University and came back to Chesterfield. I absolutely love working in this area. There's so I work in the countryside for part of the week. I work in an old mining village as my salaried role in a hospice. We've got good hospitals nearby, very good support works. As we've already mentioned, there's lots of sort of extra support through sort of the task force and the Phoenix Progamme, and it is a beautiful part of the country, and I like to get out for lots of walks on a weekend, so I personally think we work in one of the best areas in the country. Next. Yeah, so I mentioned about so the National Association of Sessional GPs, I found that probably their website the most useful when I was starting off as a locum. So they've got a link to a book that's a PDF called Thriving as a GP Locum. That is an excellent starting point and actually gives you really good, clear, sensible advice on all those sort of different things that I mentioned earlier on in the presentation. So I would recommend that you read that if you want to do locum work. Be organised, keep really good, clear records. When you're first starting out and throughout, keep your CV up to date, keep all your certificates and documents in one place, because that is anywhere that you go in locum, they're going to want things like your certificates and making sure that you're up to date with everything, and things like DBS, all those sort of things. So just make sure you've got a file with all of those in, both on your computer so you can email them across and in sort of paper as well. The Chambers is a really good starting point locally if you are speaking to somebody there for advice. And yeah, the online locum organisers. So the one that I can think of is one called My Locum Manager, but there's lots of different ones, and they're just really helpful for sort of organising things like your invoices and your admin and things all in one sort of central area. So I think that's it from me. I don't think there are more slides.
Great, thank you, Gabby. I think your talk just shows how organised you have to be, and how locum GPs almost become a directory, a walking directory of local practices, where to get their CPD, other locums that work in the area. You pick up all that information and you have that at your fingertips through experience and working through different places.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that with us this afternoon. So next up we have Dr. James Waldron, who's going to be talking to us about portfolio working. Over to you, James.
As well. So welcome all. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about portfolio working. I am a GP, but also a bit of a portfolio GP. So I'm a salaried GP a bit of the time, a locum GP a bit of the time, in leadership, in education, and doing all kinds of things. So I'm going to take you through the next 15 minutes or so, what it is, why I love this, and how you might go about getting it. So hopefully we'll move through it like that. If you've got any questions, go through, please feel free to pop them in the chat. We'll try and answer them at the end or as we go through. So let's moving forwards. So what is a portfolio career? So what actually is it? Well, it isn't necessarily this. And this is possibly what some of you have been experiencing over the last few years as GP trainees. And in fact, if you went back not so very long ago, might have been the norm for a lot of GPs. So quick show of hands. Anybody think that this looks good and sounds like exactly what they want? So sort of an 8-session study and then a bit of out hours over the weekend. I'll be the odd person, and it's absolutely fine. But I think that we as a profession are moving towards more flexible, more sort of a bit of a different way of working. But in fact, what is happening now is that we have got more and more portfolio options, more things that we can use, more strings that we can add to our bow. And because I can appreciate that this is, it's quite a long time to be sitting concentrating, I'd like people to hop onto menti.com and just open up another poll. So I'd like you to write on there what options might be available for a portfolio career. What ideas do you have? And I will try and transfer the share across to that so we can see them as they come up. Okay. Right, hopefully that'll come up. So what sort of options might be available for a portfolio career? Okay, so we've got private work, we've got teaching specialist interest, out of hours work, absolutely. Private work and media, research, leadership, flexibility, brilliant. Medical education, private education and interest, sports, absolutely. Thank you very much, Sophia, popped in the chat there. Sports are one that is, you know, if you love it, if you enjoy that, why not go and combine that with your career? Locum as an A&E in aesthetics or aesthetics, teaching, occupational health, brilliant. Keep them coming. You can submit more than one. All kinds of different things that we can be doing. Right. There's also lots of people writing here. So teaching, education is really coming up. Aesthetics has come up a few times as well. I can see that you know, it's an interesting thing that people can explore to give themselves additional skills. Cruise doctor. I actually looked into being cruise doctor as well. It sounds great. There are a few considerations, but Sophia, if or anybody, if people were interested in cruise doctoring, I actually found out quite a lot about that a couple of years ago. So please feel free to drop a message. I've got my Twitter handle there at Jammiest Dodgers on the screen. Unless you get C6 as Zarina. At Jammiest Dodgers my Twitter, but you can also give me an email, drop me a message. Health, DWP, absolutely, had a friend who works in that as well. So absolutely loads of different options here for portfolio general practice, and please feel free to keep on contributing to that as we go forward. Humanitarian, absolutely, all kinds of different things that are possible. So essentially, I've sort of split it up into four sort of main categories around clinical portfolios, non-clinical portfolios, leadership, and education and academia. Although it is absolutely by no means an exhausted list. And just when I was thinking about this, these are at least some of the ideas that came through, which we've gone through in the suggestions. And in fact, I'd quite like to draw attention to the something else. And is there a something else that we could consider here? Because really, anything that you think you'd enjoy, you might be interested, could be a portfolio career for you. And plenty of ideas that have never, that perhaps have never crossed your mind, such as actually, ideas that haven't crossed my mind either, but things that I've been looking to recently is things like coaching and the like, and how that might fit with a medical career. We have skills, we are interesting, useful people, and in fact, these things are applicable and people want those sort of skills. So remember that you're valuable and remember that you're amazing. So I think we, again, along with being valuable and amazing, and having your CCT and being a GP is the certificate that unlocked so many of these proverbial and possibly literal doors for you. And just remember that, again, you're a really valuable person, and use that key to get where it is you want to go. Your portfolio, what I'm trying to say is your portfolio career can be within reason or even slightly without reason, anything that you want it to be and anything that you want to go and find out. And it looks completely different for different people. My portfolio career, completely different to somebody else's portfolio career. And it can incorporate bits of locum, salaried, partnership that you might want to explore with it. So why be a portfolio doctor? I think that there is a lot of different reasons why I'm a portfolio doctor, and the hats analogy here is something I take from Christine Johnson, who always says that she wears a lot of different hats, and I think I wear a lot of different hats too throughout my week. I wear I don't know which would be the salaried GP, the boater. No, the bowler hat. I think the bowler hat is my salary GP job, which gives me a great foundation. It gives me a reliable income, and it also really keeps me at the heart of delivering care to patients. I've got a bit of the campaign hat there. I didn't realise there was such things called campaign hat, which maybe is my work within the ICS, and actually campaigning and working hard for people in First Five to develop opportunities and to help come and do this sort of things for people. And sometimes it can be a little bit complicated, but actually it's really exciting to wear all these different hats and have these fingers in lots of different pies to address different aspects of your personality, direct bits of what makes you interesting and strong, and what makes you tick and get you through. So I think another reason of why being a portfolio doctor is to kind of break the mold a little bit and to move away from things that may not suit you. Now, if this sort of day suits you, fantastic. But if it doesn't, actually, this is what I've changed my day to, or my week to. And different work, so I do 9.5 sessions or 9 sessions per week, but it's manageable, it's doable, and don't get to the end of the week as exhausted as I might be as if I was doing 9 clinical sessions. So I work for the training hub, sort of 2 to 3 mornings a week, depending on what it is I'm doing that week. I run events of an afternoon, just like today. Also in the evening, I occasionally do things across the weekend, but this can all be interwoven together. But I think one of the things that I would suggest is that it's really, really flexible. And if on a day that I want Friday morning off to go and do something else, or to explore another thing, or to even have go to the gym, I can do that. And that flexibility around this sort of work is absolutely amazing. But some things to think about is you can see that often it's pushed into the evening. Sometimes it can be pushed into the weekend, and it can get a little bit complicated figuring out which hat it is you're wearing. And as per my little diagram here, which I might actually adopt as my logo, trying to figure out which hat you're wearing is really important, especially to avoid conflict of interest. Somebody's asked what the training hub is. I absolutely will come to that in the Q&A later. Thank you very, very much, Hannah. Right, so building a portfolio career, and I think probably the best way of talking about how to get into portfolio career is tell you a little bit about where I've been, in my career. And I've always been that person that's never been determined exactly where it is I want to sit. So throughout medical school, I decided I want to be a paediatrician, a psychiatrist, an A&E physician, a general physician, a cardiologist, and various other things, and swung between those things constantly. And the same thing with foundation, because I really love all the different things that I do. And I also at one point wanted to be an actor and a musician, as you might be able to tell from the guitars all over the room. There's actually 6 in this room. But I decided to plant an acorn. I decided to plant a seed that I might revisit later. And if I could incorporate that into my portfolio career, I would love to. And if anybody's got any contacts within the media or within television, please get back to me. Please let me know. But then again, as throughout my entire medical career, I moved towards, do I want to do pediatrics? Do I want to do medicine? Do I want to be a general practitioner at all? And I went through that, and healthcare of the elderly seemed very attractive as well. And I also wondered whether, actually, do I want to work in this country at all? Do I want to have some time away? Do I want to develop my time? And I took that seed and I moved with it, and I started locuming, which gave me that flexibility to explore those other options. Traveled, saw the world, developed myself as a person, and realized that actually this continual professional development was really the thing for me. Working for the training hub, which I said I'll come back later, doing a postgraduate certificate in medical education, but having that salaried, which I moved from locum and salaried, which actually gave me a little bit of a firm base. And then the other thing I sort of come on to, and again, I can see my time is running out here, is that a lot of these things open doors for you. The training hub and working through my fellowship opened these doors to allow me to do what I am at the moment, which is working with that training hub, First 5 work, Phoenix, with the ICS, actually just having the most stimulating and interesting week imaginable. I didn't know it was going to do that, but that was quite a cool transition. And so now all of these different things form part of my career. I work for Next Generation GP. I'm delivering those sessions. I work for the ICS. I work for the RCGP. I do a little bit of YouTubing as well, and I can send you those videos through the training hub as well. And I work for the training hub, and it's the most interesting and stimulating thing with these sort of lines actually starting to align with each other and finding my niche. Wow. And people say, like, how do you determine what you want to do? And actually, these green lines here recognize where I've had support, where I've had kind of interesting when I've had talks with wise people that have helped me along the way, where I've had talks with people from the Phoenix Progamme, people from GPS as well. And they've actually helped me to get there. So talk to people. Talking to those people helped me determine what I want to do, helped me determine where it was that I wanted to go and what it was that what I wanted to achieve. seek and explore for those opportunities as well. If you want something, go out and find it, create that niche, but actually ask people and find out where those opportunities might lie and see where it leads you. It's really exciting. Find out what makes you tick. And as you can see, and the reason I'm talking swiftly is partly because I don't have very much time, and partly because I really love what I'm doing. And if you can find and love what you're doing, then it no longer becomes work. It's no longer onerous. And one road often leads to another. And in fact, I'd refer you to these guys, the Phoenix Progamme, the Derbyshire Task Force, and the RCGP, who can help make those opportunities, help link you in. And having that things like the new to practice and the trainee transition can really help you out along those ways. So, peaks and pits. Odd hours can be a massive learning curve, trying to do something completely different. It can be quite tiring, and the pay can be a bit can be different as well. Now, some of this stuff pays very well, and some pays a little bit less, especially because you're using different skills that are not taking on the same sort of responsibilities you might do when it comes to treating patients. And there can also be this paradox of choice, which a wise man introduced me to recently, where when you've got so many options, it can be paralyzing to determine what it is that you want to do. Actually, which direction do I want to go? Which road do I want to take? How do I get there? And actually can lead to indecision. So that's why getting advice is so important. But it is stimulating. It's a completely different pace to general practice as you'd normally find it. It's so interesting and diverse, and I get to do what makes me happy. I get to do a bit of medicine, which I love, but I also get to do the management and the leadership and just everything else, which is just fantastic. You can do what you're good at, and you can find your niche. And to be that expert and to be that person, whether it's in digital communications or in leadership or management, or gynecology or aesthetics, being that niche, being that expert can be so rewarding and fulfilling, and just keeps you going. Okay. Sorry, just a few seconds left. So if I could give you some advice as to how to proceed from right now, the first thing would be get some advice. Go speak to colleagues, go speak to friends, go speak to peers, come speak to me. I'm really happy to help with this. I'm very passionate about it. But I spoke to GPS, who are an organisation locally who can help you with conundrums you might face, or just development and an interest in a particular area. And I just wanted to figure out where my career was going. Absolutely the best thing that I've done. Feel free to come to me and I can put you in touch with them, but you don't have to be in trouble. You may just want to have a sensible person to speak to. But number one, know yourself. Find out who you are. Find out what it is that you want. Find out about what it is that might be really helpful to you, and spend some time exploring it. If that means go traveling, go traveling. If that means do locuming for a bit, do locuming for a bit. If that means go to part-time and spend time trying to become a guitar god, then do that. Know your strengths. Know what it is that you're good at and how you might be able to apply that to other things, and go and seek what fits there. And be yourself. The best person you are at being is yourself. And if you are yourself, then things naturally fall into place around you. And if you try and be somebody else, try and do something different that doesn't suit you, that's where conflict lies and where it can be very difficult. And just as a sort of a book to read, and I generally like to finish on this doing strength finders and discovering Clifton Strengths, which I did with someone called Hannah Miller, who you can find at Hello Sidekick Co., which on Twitter, is an absolutely fantastic book to read to find out about strengths-based leadership and strengths-based career progression. It's made such an impact on my confidence and such an impact on my career, and I really, really would recommend that you read it, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about that as well. Please reach out. So, thank you very, very much. Email for First Five Nottingham. You can get to us at first5nots@gmail.com. Please tweet me. Find me on Facebook, got a professional account there as well, and find your niche. And if I can help you do that, come and speak to me and I'll help. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, James. Well done. Questions. So joining us, we have Dr. Susie Bailey, if you'd like to wave. Susie is a locum GP. She's a Derbyshire medical director. She's also involved in the GP Derbyshire Task Force, head of communications, part of the Derby and Derbyshire LMC, clinical lead, and Derbyshire Medical Chambers. So many hats as well. We also have Dr. Alistair McLaughlin, if you'd like to wave. Dr. Alistair's joining us. He's a GP. He's been a Nottingham GP for over 30 years with a special interest in education and workforce. He's been a trainer, a programme director, and he's worked with Health Education England and lately the CCG. He's been involved actually in setting up the Phoenix Progamme back in 2018. And so that's a really great programme that we have locally. We're really lucky to have that. We also have Dr. Gemma Wilkinson, who's been helping answer some of the questions brilliantly in the chat box. Gemma is a GP at Hucknall Road Medical Centre. She's got an interest in medical education and has been involved in both undergraduate teaching and postgraduate teaching. And she's also an educational lead for the Phoenix Progamme in Nottingham. And we have Dr. Gail Walton, who is joining us from the lovely Lake District. She's a director for Derbyshire GP Task Force. She's part of the Derby and Derbyshire LMC. And she's also a GP partner, GP appraiser, and a GPS mentor. And if those of you aren't familiar with the GPS scheme that we have in Nottinghamshire, we can pop the link in there as well. That's a support scheme for local GPs, which is really another valuable resource. I don't know if Andy has joined us yet. No, okay, all right. So I was just going to start with one of the questions that came up about fellowship, and they were interested in knowing a bit more about fellowship. So Eilise, I think you're still with us.
Yes, I am, yeah.
Yeah. So I wondered if you wanted to share what a GP fellowship was and your experience of it.
Yeah, so we had an email around advertising the fellowship and saying that you could come up with an idea for something that you could do. So that's very nice. It's not often that you get to kind of create your own role. So I thought, and I realised that I'd been on maternity leave quite a few times and realised that maybe that was my area. So that's where I came up with the idea of trying to create more support for people who have been off, but for whatever reason, whether that's caring responsibilities or ill health. So that was the nature of the fellowship, was that there was a lot of individuality built into it. So you could really put your stamp on it, your mark. But yeah, I just had the email and then submitted my proposal and then had an interview. So yeah, I definitely recommend a fellowship.
And Gemma, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I think GP fellowship has been an excellent opportunity that's been available both in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire over the last few years. Because it's been so successful, it's now being rolled out as a national programme. So in fact, everybody who is starting work over the next, for the first 2 years post CCT will be called a GP fellow. With the transition to being a national programme, it has changed a little bit. And actually, one of the issues that really relating to COVID is that we're still waiting for the final guidance on that. But it will have three main elements, which is induction, mentoring and peer support, and both Notts and Derby are providing this for their new to practice GPs already. One of the things, unfortunately, which has been lost for now, but may come back, is perhaps a sort of enhanced offer that Eilise is talking about, and having this opportunity to develop additional sort of services, etc. However, both GP Task Force and Phoenix Progamme are keen to keep some elements of that ongoing if we're able to. It may just be that doesn't happen immediately post CCT, but perhaps happens after a year or two. But in some ways that may be no bad thing, because you may have sort of settled into sort of working life and so on, and then once, a bit like James said, once you sort of get to know who you are and what you want to do, then further opportunities may come up. So I think watch our websites for both GP Task Force and Phoenix, and watch this space, because I think there will be other things coming up in the future.
Brilliant, thank you, Gemma. There was a question about partnership, so I'll direct it to you, Julia. a couple of things. One was first about your views on going straight into partnership. That's something that seems to be quite daunting for a lot of newly qualified GPs. So I just wondered if you wanted to share your thoughts and feelings on that.
Yeah, I think I felt exactly the same way when so the opportunity of the partnership came up for me because I was doing a maternity locum here, and then I was offered the partnership a few months into that, and I initially thought I am way too young to get into a partnership, but I absolutely loved working at this practice. And speaking to colleagues who do salaried jobs, and there's not that much difference in it, and if you like the management, then actually it's that side of things can be enjoyable. And then when I looked at sort of equivalent jobs of a salary job I was going to go into, the equivalent of pay with it, I was looking at sort of gaining a day back to myself if I went into partnership. So I actually got a lot more flexibility in joining the partnership. I did ask a lot of advice around it. I was very nervous at the start of signing into a partnership, but honestly, when you look at the contract, if it's somewhere where you want to work, and I knew that I wanted to stay at the same practice for quite some time. I like to get to know my patients. I like that continuity of care. I like to be able to build somewhere, and I wanted to develop my other job roles in a certain place. Then I knew I was going to stay at one place for a long time anyway. So yeah, and I've really enjoyed the extra roles that the partnership has made me get involved with. And I honestly didn't think I would like management, and I didn't think I would like sort of hiring staff and having choices in that. But actually, you know, I actually like the fact that I can choose who I work with, and the flexibility that it gives me. And I'd say don't be put off by it. Have a look at the job role itself, and have a look at sort of the equivalent of the pay as well. And that's something that I didn't actually go into on my talk, but looking at the contract on what the take home is each month, but then actually get the last 3 years accounts of the practice. And there might be sort of like with ours, top up bonuses at the end of each year when we look at the accounts. You know, you put in the work and you get the bonuses out of that. So it enables me to work 5 sessions where I might have been working 7 as a salaried.
Brilliant, thank you, Julia. And we had another question. It's a bit specific. You may or may not be able to answer, but someone said that they were interested in building their own surgery and setting up a partnership with their friends. Where would they go for advice on this? So don't worry if you don't know, but I put it to you first, and then if anyone else knows, wave your hands and I'll unmute you.
My advice with that would be, that is quite a daunting task to start with. Working out how a GP practice works it's not quite the same as any other business. So I would say that side of things has been quite easy for me because I've got 6 other partners who know what they're doing and a practice manager who knows what they're doing. So I don't think I've got any specific advice from it, but I would think that's quite a daunting task to do without any experience.
That's fine. Thank you. Anyone else with any information on that? No.
I think Alistair's.
Alistair, sorry, I didn't see you. Alistair, can you unmute do you know how to unmute yourself, yeah. Alistair?
So you can't just start anywhere you want to. What has to happen is you have to have an opportunity to the only 2 ways you can start a practice on your own is if there's an APMS contract, which is a practice in an area that the government decides is important, and you can then tender for that. Or sometimes you can find a GP who is about to retire, a single-handed GP, and you can join their partnership knowing they're going to retire in the next few days often, and then you have the partnership yourself after that. You can't just start on your own. It's just not allowed. I think it was the Medical Practice Committee that stopped that, and it's about it. So there's a bit of a monopoly. So the only way you can do it is through CCGs or by those cunning methods that I've just mentioned.
Or by starting a private GP surgery. That's
yeah, you can do that.
You
You can do that. I have to say that, I mean, I trained in London. I think there are a few in London that survive financially, and there's a few GPs in other areas, including Nottingham, that do okay. But remember that you receive probably between £100 and £200 a patient in the normal world in NHS land, and patients don't really want to pay £50 to £100 just to see you necessarily. So you've got to have an area of affluence to do that, and it is a different form of treatment because you can only give private prescriptions. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. It's not impossible, but it's a challenge.
Great, thank you, Alistair. We have a question about salaried work. So, Eilise, I've popped this one to your way. It's about looking for salaried work. So, when should someone who's considering a salaried job start looking for work? Should they start looking during their ST3? And the other part of that question was how best to go about looking for salaried work.
Yeah, so I don't think you can, I think ST3 would be fine to start looking around, because you might hear about doctors that are thinking of retiring or going on maternity leave. So I think ST3 is perfectly fine. The nice thing would be if the place that you're training at, if there's a job coming up, obviously only if you like that place. But yeah, that's always a good option, because then you know what you're signing up for. But yeah, other things that I think I mentioned, sometimes adverts are emailed around, looking on the internet. There's NHS websites that have got job adverts. In the back of the medical magazines, probably you've got a stack of them, everybody somewhere. They often have jobs, but word of mouth is definitely a good one. And yeah, I don't think you can start too early, really.
Great, thank you. And then Susie?
So just to say that both the GP Task Force and Phoenix do send out job adverts to the GPs and ST3s on their mailing list. So it would be a really good idea, given your contact details, to either or both, depending if you work between Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, and then you can keep an eye on what's going on from a job advert point of view, and also all of that support that Gabby and Julia and Eilise and James have mentioned all comes out through those channels as well.
Great. And James?
So I think the idea of salaried work is becoming, the stability of the office is really good. And I think another way you can do it, and the way that I got into mine, was during my year worth of locuming. I found places that I worked at various different places, and also you can somewhat tell if they've got regular shifts available. And I locumed there for 6 months, decided I really liked the team, and it was a place that I would like to be, securely employed at. And I suppose in a similar way to what Julia did moving into partnership, I went from locum moving into salaried, because as with these things, there are commitments to it, and you want to make sure it's the right place. So I would highly recommend that as an option, or the way to go through things, if you want to just make sure it gelled properly. And it also gives you the opportunity to say, right, I'm going to commit to this for a while. Perhaps you want to do something, in the interim, which gives you loads of flexibility with that.
Great, thank you. There was a question from someone who's interested in working for the LMC and the CCG, and how do they improve their chances of finding work? I'll put this one to you, Susie.
Yeah, that's a great question. So lots of different ways, to be honest. So from an LMC point of view, it's worth just approaching your local medical committee and seeing what opportunities there are. Certainly, I'm sure Nottinghamshire the same, but Derbyshire, we let people come and observe our committee meetings, which is at the moment quite easy because they're all virtual. And you can find out what sort of things happen, what decisions are made, and try and get a feel for it. There will be times every between 2 and 4 years, depending on the LMC, where you will see adverts coming out about election processes. So it's worth having a look at that. And there is an opportunity for most LMCs to join as a trainee as well. The CCG will depend quite a lot, because obviously it's a massive organisation and there's lots of different opportunities. So it's worth having a look on their site, because there will be job opportunities. And also most of them have a newsletter or through their sort of web portals that you might have when you log on. Job opportunities do come up. But I think, as sort of James said, with portfolio roles, you kind of find something that you enjoy and just go down that route, start having those conversations. Certainly I got into the LMC because I was really interested in communications. I did a bit of stuff online, learning how to get better at it, and then literally approached them and asked if I could run some of their social media. And that was about 4 or 5 years ago, and just doors have opened since then. And I think that's the way most of us who've got portfolio roles have found things move. Just find something you're interested in, make the approach, and then see what happens.
Thank you, Susie. And also I'll put that to you, Alistair, for your experience about working within the LMC and CCG.
What I would suggest is, you're quite right, being interested in and becoming more knowledgeable in an area tends to get you noticed in an area. What I would do with the CCG is I would do it via the primary care network leadership involvement. So each PCN will have a clinical director, and you just make it known to them that you're interested, and then at that point that they will take the information back to each CCG is different, but they have sort of like a clinical cabinet or advice, and they're always keen to get people who know a little, or are interested in clinical areas particularly. And if you get involved that way, then you can persuade them then that you'd like to do more of the leadership type stuff. There are various courses that you can do, and they're crying out for it. And to be honest, the best thing that can happen to CCGs is to have a generation that are just qualifying being their leaders, because there are generational shifts, and I think this is one of them. And I think it's really important that the younger generation are actually involved in the leadership of the CCGs and the LMCs. So just go to it. I think that you'll be welcomed with open arms, to be honest.
Yeah, James, you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this finding the opportunity and linking opportunity is really important. And the ways I've got into a lot of my portfolio roles is by doing things like Next Generation GP and saying yes to lots of things, and just kind of going with the opportunities as they arise. And you'll start to find that there are certain people who are in the know about such and such. And for quite a lot of stuff, somebody would say, have you heard about this? I think you'd be quite good for it. And actually, once you start knowing where it is and like knowing your strengths, as I was mentioning earlier, knowing what you are good at, and people then start picking up on that, and it kind of snowballs from there. Although one word of warning, sometimes when you start saying yes to everything, you can find yourself with an unbelievably busy week. And when you're as enthusiastic about things as I am, taking that step back can be challenging, but interesting.
I think the slide from your presentation with all the arrows going everywhere demonstrated that perfectly, James. There was a question about locum work, Gabby, and it was to do with home visits. So whether you have to do or obliged to do home visits as a locum, or can you choose not to do home visits?
So no, you're not obliged to do home visits. I think it's very much, what I would say about locum work, a lot of it's to do with negotiation when you first set up what you're going to be doing with the practice. So no, you don't have to do home visits. But then again, I think it's good to negotiate with the practices, because I think if you do show some flexibility, and I mean, I do home visits when I do my locum shifts. Quite often, if it's a new place, I may do 1 or 2 shifts without doing a home visit, just whilst I get used to the practice and the area and the patient population. And then as I get more used to it, then yes, I have done home visits. But again, you can negotiate how many home visits that you're willing to do, and that's something that you can discuss and negotiate with each practice as needed. So I know some of the practices that I've worked at previously, I've said that I would do a home visit if the need arose, but then they've not needed it. So it's something that's negotiable, but you by no means have to do it. So that's the beauty, in a way. You can sort of determine what you do a bit more yourself.
And I know locums go about invoicing for visits differently. So the follow-up question to that was, how do you invoice or how do you charge for visits? Does that affect your overall pay?
Yeah, so I would say each locum does it probably differently. So you can do it as a session. So it depends again what you've negotiated before you go. So some locums may do it as a session, and that includes, so within that perhaps 4-hour session, they are going to see X amount of patients and do 1 home visits, and that's all part of that sort of 4 hours that they do. Equally as much, some people will charge per home visit as an added extra on whatever they've already agreed to. So there's different ways of doing it, and that depends on sort of, again, what you negotiate prior.
Great. And Susie?
Yeah, so I think that's really fair. I think one of the most important things is around making sure you've got a really good set of terms and conditions as a locum. So I work through chambers because I liked having a set of terms and conditions that was familiar across. I don't like booking and I don't like invoicing. So for me, it's perfect. I pay a small percentage of my wage and that sorts it all out. But we have set templates, which might be 15 patients, 12 patients in a visit, and the costs are proportionate to the amount of work you're doing, and obviously include some admin. So terms and conditions are really important. But also, as Gabby says, the more you can offer a practice, the more employable you are. So if you are willing to kind of flex about and do a combination of visits or agree to do extra things, provided it's controlled and you and the practice are happy, then that degree of being flexible will actually make you infinitely more employable, I think, as a locum, and people want to use you again.
Thank you, Susie. And the last question I have is for James, and it's to do with the financial side of being a portfolio GP. So wearing so many hats, how do you go about the billing and financial management of all those hats?
Thanks. I suppose it's a couple of aspects to that. So one, it does take a little bit of organisation. I think that when you go into a role, finding out exactly who it is that you invoice, what it is that you are being expected to do for that money is quite important. And it can be tricky conversations to have later on if you're unsure. But having those discussions is helpful. The way that I tend to determine to kind of keep the organisation of things well is I actually use my locum manager, which allows me to invoice everything that is not my salaried role. Although as time went on with another regular portfolio role, I did move into a slightly different arrangement where it's a little bit more predictable, so you don't have to invoice each time, but I still keep track of all of my the accounting aspects of it and my expected income and the amount of to give to my accountants at the end of the year. I still do that via the online portal. I think it's one of the biggest challenges of being a portfolio GP is actually knowing where your different income streams come in, how much money you're expecting at the end of a month. But at the same time, using these little tools can help you get on top of that really easily, and it isn't a stressful thing for me. Once I got a good system going. Same with locuming. I'm sure Gabby will reflect that as well. When I was locuming full-time and not doing all this other stuff, if I had 8 different places to invoice, just being able to go click, it's gone, and then was a godsend, much less stressful.
Great, thank you. We've had a couple more questions actually. One is to do with maternity and paternity leave and pay, and how that might influence your model of working, which role you'd pick as a GP. Would anyone like to respond to that? Should
I start first on what it's like as in
a
partnership? Yes. So it was definitely one of the things that I was looking for in a partnership role. I guess you've got to look at the contract. Again, I'm quite lucky in my practice in that we're 6 female GPs and 1 male GP. So the maternity is pretty good on our contract. But I think it would be individual, and it's very clearly written on contracts as something you could look for quite easily.
Just going to add to that point about Julia saying about partnership agreements and the terms of those. Obviously, if you're salaried, there's the BMA model contract to look at, and that's very clear on parental leave and sick leave and such like, and you can get good advice from your LMCs and BMA. Locum, I'm no expert on leave regulations for locums, so someone else on the panel can probably take that one. Portfolio, depending on how many organisations you're working for, then it will be a little bit of a mishmash, but it should all be very clear, and you should have in effect a line manager if, for example, you were doing a CCG role, to ask those questions of. So the answers are available, and if you're not getting answers, you know, come to us as LMCs or talk to the BMA. Don't be left in a muddle, but someone else on the panel can probably answer that from a locum perspective.
And I was in partnership when I went on maternity leave because I'm sensible, and so I got the useful of the maternity leave at that point. But you can claim maternity allowance as a locum, but it's one of the added risks of locuming. You lose that benefit of a sort of more formal maternity pay and sickness pay, and that's why locum rates are higher. Because it reflects that risk that you have in that way of working more flexibly. But yeah, maternity allowances. I'll find a link because I'm sure there's one on one of the locum websites that will be helpful and explain it all.
I think that's a really good point, Susie, about, you know, through times when I've been locum and with a lot of not all portfolio roles, but certainly some of them, that they're often will be sort of a per session basis, like an hours for money, and what may not have anything in them about maternity or paternity. And equally, I think another thing to really think about if you're getting into making locuming a full-time part of your work or portfolio is looking at sort of things like, if you were to, you know, need to go off maternity leave, if you were to injure yourself or become unwell, actually how does that impact your day-to-day and your mortgage, etc., and what would that mean? And that may mean looking at things like income protection, life insurance, and all that kind of stuff, which is something worth getting some advice about. If you could lose that portion of income and it wouldn't matter to you, well, it's less important. But if it really would, and if it might impact on your ability to pay the mortgage back, well, it's something you wouldn't want to think about afterwards. And I've got a couple of colleagues, somebody who broke her leg just after she started in a locum role, who had planned for that, but had she not planned for that, spent 3 months being unable to work while her leg healed. So this swings and roundabouts, but it does have lots of advantages to it. I'm still overly pro.
Thank you, Dave. That's a really important point to raise, actually. Something we often forget to think about, isn't it? We forget to look after ourselves or think about what happens if we get unwell and how that affects our income. So thanks for raising that. There was a question for you, Gabby. If you're a salaried GP and just locum a little bit, is it worth doing that? Is it worth dabbling in a little bit of locum work and paying for things like locum organiser and so on?
So I think it depends how much you are doing. I think if you're doing some form of regular locum work, then the online sort of organisation planners, they're not actually that much money. I think it's something about £10 a month, perhaps, or something like that.
£12 a month is late.
Yeah. So they're not overly expensive, and actually they are very, very useful, very clear to use, and they just keep everything in one place. They keep a very clear record of things. You can do that yourself, but in terms of I think they're fairly useful, and actually I think most locums that I've spoken to do use something along those lines, and I would recommend it to people. But yeah, it's just very clear and easy to use.
Great, thank you. Well, I think that's all the questions that have been put through to us. One's just come through. We might as well answer it. Which locum organiser tool do you recommend? There's quite a few out there, but Gabby, anyone in particular? Oh yes.
So the one I
MLM, as
use,
James said.
Yeah.
is that the My Locum?
Yeah, My Locum Manager. I haven't used another one, but it's really good.
I think that's the one that's linked with the RCGP as well, and you can get a discount if you
correct.
the RCGP. But there are a lot of them. I know I use that one, and then there is through the chambers. I think there's another one as well that they use. So there's lots of different ones.
Okay, so what we were going to do is we were going to run the Mentimeter that we ran at the beginning to see if any of our speakers have changed opinion during the talk. So, James, if you could run the Mentimeter again, and for those that are still with us, thanks for staying on, and cast your votes. What type of GP role are you most attracted to at present? If you go on to www.menti.com, Julia, well done, and type in the code 515873. Let's see.
As the person, because it's about 50% portfolio before, if it doesn't get back up towards that, I'll be very upset with myself.
You scared everyone with your hats, James, if that happens.
I like hats. Or I could consider it in carrying many different guitars. That's the... Which guitar am I playing today?
Show us your hand, James, so we know you're not trying to put 50 different versions of Portfolio GP on the Mentimeter.
I think the advantage is that you could do all of the other three. It's slightly unfair to ask people this because you can do all of the other three and be a Portfolio GP.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Well, thanks. That's really interesting, and it's great to see that actually the partnership interest has improved. I know in the chat earlier on, Susie has posted the new to partnership scheme that's rolled out. That's there to encourage new to practice GPs and first 1 and 2s into partnership. So do take a look at that. And if you're in the Derbyshire area, you're really lucky in that the GP Task Force Derbyshire programme has a specific programme for that. So I think that just leaves me to close up the afternoon and to say thank you, first of all, to our speakers. So thank you to Julia, to Eilise, to Gabrielle and to James, and thank you to our panelists for joining us, so to Alistair and to Susie and to Gail and Gemma, who've been there in the background helping plan this event, and they're answering the chat. I think what's come from today's event has, what I've sort of come to realise is that actually those 4 roles, all of them are essentially a portfolio GP. There's so much flexibility within each one. You can do so many things. You can have your main hat, so to speak, as a partner or a salaried or a locum. But what we've seen from our speakers today is that none of them just do that one job, and they all pursue their own interests, which is the great thing about general practice as a career.